The White House has once again changed its story as to why Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard was on site during the FBI's raid of a Fulton County election facility last week. President Trump said yesterday it was actually Attorney General Pam Bondi who told Gabbard to go. This just one day after he said in an interview he didn't actually know why she was there. Look at both of these responses.
Why is Tulsi Gabbard there?
I don't know, but, you know, a lot of the cheating comes from it's international cheating. You have people, they say, from China trying to.
You put this on
let me ask you,
Social.
do you think China tries to influence our election?
We know that foreign governments try to influence a lot of things in this country.
Therefore, she's foreign government.
But you've tweeted out some theories about Italians and satellites. I mean, do you believe that stuff?
No, I didn't cheat. I sometimes will retweet.
Yeah.
I'll retweet. But let me ask you this. If China or any of these countries are involved in our elections, that would bring her into it. We have our Director of National and International Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who's doing a great job. Where's Tulsi? She took a lot of heat 2 days ago because she went in at Pam's insistence. She went in and she looked at votes that want to be checked out from Georgia. They say, why is she doing it? Right, Pam? Why is she doing it? Because Pam wanted her to do it. And you know why? Because she's smart.
Not the typical headlines you hear at a bipartisan prayer breakfast. But of course, Gabbard has faced mounting criticism because she went to the Georgia election site as FBI agents seized hundreds of boxes of records. It's not where you would typically find the Director of National Intelligence. In a letter earlier this week, Gabbard told Congress, who has a lot of questions about this, that her presence there was, quote, requested by the president. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was then specifically asked about that yesterday.
Did President Trump himself ever ask DNI Gabbard to head down to Fulton County, Georgia?
The president was asked and answered that question just yesterday. I've seen a lot of the media in this room get very caught up with the semantics of why Tulsi Gabbard is there. I will tell you why, and the president agrees with this, because election security is essential to national security.
Want to bring in co-anchor of the weekend and Washington reporter for MS Now, my friend Jackie Alamany here on set. Okay, I am confused and maybe I'm bogged down in the semantics, but I just want to understand how Tulsi Gabbard ended up in a place that you would never see a Director of National Intelligence. And that is in part why The Hill is asking so many questions. They just want to understand, because if there's foreign election interference, as the president is sort of alluding to there, shouldn't we know?
Absolutely, Ali. Nothing about any of this is normal. And even though Tulsi Gabbard has now told Congress in this letter that she sent back to Jim Hines and lawmakers who requested information, some preliminary information about who sent her, it's still very unclear why she was there. I mean, it should give us enough consternation that the president, Pam Bondi, Todd Blanche, and Caroline Leavitt are all giving disparate answers about why Gabbard was there in the first place. Gabbard is now claiming that she technically has the purview in her role as ODNI director, that it is part of one of the elements that she oversees, which includes the FBI's intelligence and counterintelligence divisions. She says this was established in a 2011 memorandum. But again, anyone that you speak to, any expert, former DNI people, they believe that this is outside of her role and completely anathema, really, to what she's supposed to be doing. That being said, it also raises alarms in which the context that this is coming in. This comes as the Trump administration and the Justice Department are continuing to ask states for more voter rolls. Minneapolis, Maine, other places that the administration likes to point out and single out as sanctuary cities, and other threats that Trump allies have made in recent days about nationalizing elections and potentially even placing ICE agents around voting elections. It's starting to look like a coherent plan around the election coming in November, as Republicans are set to potentially face massive losses.
Yeah, and I think that you cast the landscape here so well, because Fulton County and the investigations into those elections are just one part where when you zoom out, it starts to kind of come into shape of why people might not be far-fetched to at least question what are elections going to look like in the midterms? And so especially when you hear Caroline Leavitt not ruling out the possibility that ICE could be at the polls, which, again, is just one of the many tenets that Democrats are trying to negotiate into some guardrails on ICE. And, of course, Steve Bannon is on the other side of that saying, no, we're definitely going to be there. I mean, what does that amount to in your conversations with sources? Democrats, but also Republicans, who every single Republican that I talk to has a different answer in private than they do in public. And it's getting to the point where how do you have those concerns about the fundamental issue of elections in this country and not air them publicly?
It's extremely concerning. I mean, we have seen election administration officials really grapple with this issue since really 2016. Being in that job now has become a hazard. I mean, these people do deserve hazard pay at the end of the day. They face death threats, and now they're facing real interference from the federal government, something that they already dealt with in 2020. But it is interesting how it is permeating in different circles and different legislative branches. I mean, you saw on the Hill this week, suddenly the SAVE Act was back in the conversation. Lots of Republicans trying to use this moment with the DHS funding gap as leverage to get legislation passed to ensure and force people to show ID. I think all of this is a way, it weighs in to try to talk about the election and ways that Republicans are going to potentially set up this coming election and to make it look as it's been rigged in some way to brace for these losses.
Yeah, and frankly, I've been asking Democrats about how they will even strategize or preempt or try to preempt these kinds of actions. And none of them really seem to have good answers yet. So if the argument at the beginning of the administration was Democrats are caught flat-footed, again, we have many, many months of lead time here as we just question if this is ultimately some kind of cohesive plan. And I think Democrats might be behind the ball on questioning that at this point as well. I also want to get you, as we're talking about Hill dynamics, on the other story that has been persistent throughout the week, because former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton continues to advocate for a public hearing after she and former President Bill Clinton agreed to testify before the House Oversight Committee as part of its investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. This comes amid a back-and-forth fight between the Clintons and Oversight Chairman James Comer, who published emails yesterday between his committee and the Clintons' legal team, laying out the terms for their depositions. Clinton called out Comer then on social media yesterday, writing, quote, "Let's stop the games. If you want this fight, let's have it in public. You love to talk about transparency. There's nothing more transparent than a public hearing. Cameras on. We will be there." Hillary Clinton is set to testify February 26th. The former president's deposition is supposed to be the next day. Looming over all of this is the fact that Congress could hold a vote at any time to hold them in contempt. It kind of feels like they could have the votes to pass that, too, which would really put us in a whole different territory. But for now, I'm fascinated by the ways that even people like Matt Gaetz responded to Hillary Clinton's tweet yesterday and wrote, "I'm with her." Of course, a glib way of referencing her 2016 slogan. But at the same time, the politics on this are so weird. Even Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene are saying, yeah, let them testify publicly.
The strange bedfellows that have resulted from the Epstein files has been a whole other storyline in and of itself. But I think that Comer is in a really tough spot here, especially after the Judiciary Committee brought Jack Smith forward to testify before the House and might even be coming again. I think there are a lot of Democrats who believe that this is potentially a bad idea, that it is a reflection of the erosion of some of the democratic norms, that Republicans' number one and number two political targets are actually being forced to testify before Congress. But on the other hand, I think they feel like in terms of having leverage in the moral high ground here and setting a precedent that Donald Trump is going to be then held to of a former president testifying before Congress about something, mind you, that Bill Clinton and both Donald Trump are mentioned in repeatedly. Donald Trump more than Bill Clinton, let's be very clear, this is really the best way forward for Democrats who, at the end of the day, have very little leverage when it comes to congressional investigations.
Yeah, we are often talking about what levers of power you can pull when you are in the minority. This is certainly an example of one of them. I will also say I had reporting yesterday that they've set a closed-door deposition with Les Wexner. He's a billionaire benefactor of Epstein's, a former associate, of course, someone who there's a lot of interest in. Comer had sort of said this to me on camera earlier in the week. We have a deal, we have an agreement, but he's 88 years old. Kind of sounds like they might be traveling to him to do this closed-door deposition. So again, this is an investigation that has many, many threads to it, but certainly this is one of the more high-profile ones that Republicans are sort of champing at the bit on as they try to muddy the political waters around it. co-anchor of The Weekend, Washington reporter for MS Now. Jackie Alemany, thank you as always. And we will be watching tomorrow morning, my favorite show to wake up to, truly.